This happened a few years ago, and sometimes I still have nightmares where I didn't manage to get away. Let me start off by saying that I live in a pretty big city. Lots of bars and clubs, and I have experience with partying. I have been in blackout drunk situations, and this was not that. I no longer go out on my own. That night, I decided to go out with my friends bar hopping. I mainly knew only one of the girls that I hung out with on the regular. The other two were more acquaintances or strangers. I was very outgoing and I loved meeting people, so that was nothing new for me. We had a few drinks at a bar and continued on to the next one, having fun and great times. One of the girls I didn't know well pulled out the party stuff sometime during our second bar visit. I decided to skip it because I wasn't looking to get too effed up that night. My friend said yes, and she and the third girl went to the bathroom. The second girl, let's call her Barb, kept saying that I should go with the two others, but I declined and declined. She got a little aggressive, and after the third time I declined. My friend came back just then, and Barb acted like nothing had just happened. We had some new guys join our group to flirt. I'm in a relationship, but my friend and Barb were not. By then, the second girl had left already. Barb and my friend were starting to get pretty messed up. I went to use the bathroom and to text my boyfriend that I was coming home soon, but I saw that my phone was dead. When I came back, the guys had bought us all shots. I was still pretty sober, so I declined the shot. Barb shoved the shot into my hand, and to avoid a scene, I took it. I started to tell my friend that I was heading home, but one look at her face and Barb and I saw that they were out of it. I was starting to feel pretty woozy myself. So I grabbed my things and their things and started shoving them to go. The guys that bought the shots were protesting, but I wasn't getting resistance from the girls. I hailed a cab. My phone was dead, so no Uber. And I remember putting the girls in the back and telling the driver that we were dropping off my friends at their houses and then going to my address. And then blacked out. I remember dropping off my friend, and then a blackout, and then I was alone with that driver. I was in the front seat and he was holding my hand. I looked around disoriented, took in the sight of him holding my hand while driving. Like my boyfriend would, I saw my wallet in the center cup holder. The meter was off and was telling me that he was taking me to a romantic place. I told him no, please take me home, that my boyfriend was waiting at home. He said something along the lines of, "Stop talking about him, I told you," which to me in hindsight indicates that I had told him already many times. He said he just wanted to pretend for a little and he held my hand tighter. I didn't want to trigger a violent reaction, so I left my hand there and started to reach for my wallet with my other hand. He saw, let go of my hand and took my wallet from the cup holder to his other side where I couldn't reach. I was still woozy and I blacked out again. When I came to my senses, we were parked near a very known romantic and touristy location in my city. Normally this place is packed, but not that night. It's pretty far from anything else too, and it's surrounded by woods. I started to cry and tell him to please take me home, that I wanted to see my boyfriend. I won't tell anyone, please. He looked at me and said, "I will take you home if you pretend you're my girlfriend for a little while." I sat there in shock. I wished my brain wasn't addled. I wished that I had never gone out. I wished that I could see my boyfriend for the 1000th time that night. I said okay and he smiled. Put my wallet back in the cup holder. I took it slowly and put it under my leg. He took my hand and looked out the front window out into the little lake that he had brought me to. He started talking and I don't remember what he was saying. I was trying not to black out again. I waited for him to look at me and asked again, "Please take me home." He said if I let him give me a kiss, but I said no. He looked mad for a fraction of a second and squeezed the hand he was still holding. He leaned in fast and kissed me anyways. I kept my lips sealed tight against him, ready to fight, ready to bite and scratch and to not go down easy. He let go of my hand and backed away. He started the car and started our way back to civilization. I was crying as quietly as possible, trying not to be heard so he would forget I was there and want to touch me, to hold my hand. I waited until we were near enough people that I could bolt out of the car and find another way home. I think he saw me grabbing my wallet from under my leg and knew my intention to jump out at the next red light, but he snatched it again and said that he would drive me. I just nodded, but by then, I didn't care about the wallet, my phone, or anything else. I led jumping out. No matter what, I was going to get home. I didn't know what time it was by then, but I do know there was almost no cars driving in my usually busy city. No buses, no people. I didn't care anymore. He stopped at red light. I unlocked the door and I yanked it open and ran. I didn't look back, but I heard a car appeal out of the intersection. He was running too. My phone was still dead, no wallet, so no money, and I was really far from my house. I was still drowsy and crying. I had no idea of the time and I started walking home. I heard a car pull up near me and started running out of instinct. I heard a woman's voice yell out, "Are you okay?" I stopped and swirled around, and the most beautiful person I have ever seen in this world was walking towards me slowly, hands out in front of her so as not to scare me. I started crying even harder, even more incoherent than I had ever been in my life. She hugged me so hard and asked for my boyfriend's number. She called him and he answered straight away. She started telling him where I was and that I was okay, and that she was taking me home. I cried the whole way back, trying to explain what happened, but still woozy, still freaking out. It was hard, so we drove in relative silence. When we got home, my boyfriend was waiting outside, losing his mind. My savior gave me a phone number to call her when I felt better and drove off. It was 5 a.m. I left the bar at 10 p.m. and that's all I can remember. A week later, my wallet showed up in my mailbox. When I was 16, some friends and I went to an outdoor concert festival type thing. We parked at the mall and took a shuttle to the venue. For perspective, the mall is a 20-minute drive from our homes and the venue is another 20 minutes away in a different direction. During the concert, I ended up losing my friends in the crowd. I didn't care much as I wanted to get to the front, and I could just call them after the concert had ended. Well, of course, I lose my phone somewhere in these sea of people, and don't even notice until the last show wraps up. I search the ground as the people dissipate with no luck. Reluctantly, I just hop on the bus heading back to the mall, hoping to meet them at the car. The car is gone and I start to freak out a little bit. It's 10 p.m. when I head to the bus station to see when the next bus to my city is coming. Just my luck, it happens to be Memorial Day, so no buses until 10 a.m. I borrow a stranger's phone and call the two numbers that I know, my mom and brother. My mom doesn't answer, but my brother does. He basically gives me the sex to suck talk and hangs up. So I'm alone, scared, and a little drunk in a city that I don't know. I try walking, but quickly give up when I realize that I'm basically walking down a random highway toward who knows where. Back at the station, I'm just staring at the map when a stranger creeps up behind me. He asks me where I'm headed and I tell him the truth. He conveniently is going to the same city and asks if I would like to split a cab. Realizing this is my only option, as I didn't have enough of my own, we get in the car. It turns out that he had even less than I did. We barely have enough to get to the heart of the city, which is a 10-minute drive from my house, but at least I know my way home from there. During the drive, this guy gets progressively more creepy. He's aware that I'm 16 and he's 25, but he scoots closer every minute, touching me, insisting that I come back with him to his place, and even writes his phone number on my bare leg. As we get there, I realize the situation that I'm in. We were about to get out into this quiet area at 2 a.m., and the cabbie is going to drive off, leaving no one here to hear me scream. The second that he gets out, I turn to the driver and beg him to take me a few streets further, so I can at least put some distance from him and me. The cab driver hadn't said a word the whole way, but he definitely heard everything. He asks me for my address and he drives me all the way home. The creeper watches as the cab drives off, with me still inside. When we got to my home, I offered to wake my mom up to pay him, but he declined, saying that he's just glad that I'm safe. I broke in through the kitchen window, got to bed, and cried my tears of relief for who knows how long. This happened to me when I was a kid, 10 to be exact. I grew up in a military family and lived in the Middle East for a significant portion of my life. Because of this, we traveled frequently to different countries because of the low cost and proximity. On this particular vacation, we flew into Cairo, Egypt, for a long weekend, and we only lived like 2 to 3 hours away. It was late at night and we were staying at the Marriott Hotel, which had a taxi shuttle service that was supposed to pick us up. For some reason, our driver never showed, so we were forced to take a regular cab to take us there, which took forever to find that late at night. We finally found one that was offering us a pretty good deal. They don't run by meters, instead they just give a flat rate that they choose, and headed towards the hotel. Out of nowhere, another taxi basically T-bones us in the middle of the road, causing us to stop. There aren't really defined roads in a lot of Arab places, so it isn't really that surprising that we got hit. In Arab nature, the two drivers get out of the cars, each yelling that it was the other's fault, and looking like they were going to throw hands. Eventually, they got back into their respective taxis and parted ways. My family and I were completely taken aback. We had been in Egypt less than 2 hours and have already had quite the adventure. We finally got to the hotel, exhausted as it must have been at 3 a.m. by this point. Our driver helped us get all of our bags out and get settled, and told us that he felt so bad about the car accident that he offered to pick us up the next morning and take us to the Great Pyramids, which was on our agenda, for a super cheap rate. My parents agreed and decided on a time for him to come, though I can't remember when. Flash forward to the next morning. Everyone is ready for the day, excited to see how crazy it was going to be. Our driver was outside waiting for us, leaning against the car like someone in an old movie would, right when he said he would be there. I'm a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl that had a deep tan at the time, and being in Egypt, that was a rare sight. When the driver saw me in the daylight, he gave me the creepiest, most unsettling look that sent chills down my spine, even as a 10-year-old. I knew something wasn't right with him. Nonetheless, we got in his taxi and headed towards the pyramids. He continued to try and talk to me and joke around with me the whole ride, something I found to be extremely creepy and bold since both my parents were in the cab. We get super close and there's an entrance that people can go through and walk the long distance to the pyramids, and there's an entrance that taxis can go through. You have to pay to see them. It's strange but true. Our driver keeps making jokes about my blonde hair and blue eyes and bringing up that he could get me into the pyramids for free, so my parents wouldn't have to pay the extra ticket price. We laughed it off and my parents paid him and said thank you and began to exit the taxi. I don't remember how it happened, but at some point after I got out of the car, he did too, and he directed me towards his trunk. I was confused and thought that we had forgotten something, so I stayed behind as my parents walked towards the gate to get whatever I thought we had left. The driver pops the trunk, but there wasn't anything in it. He grabbed my arm and put a hand on my back, trying to push me into the trunk, and said, "I'm getting you in for free," over and over again as I resisted. Naturally, I freaked out and screamed out to my mom and dad at the top of my lungs, terrified. When they heard me and noticed that I wasn't behind them, they started sprinting back to the car. When the driver heard me scream, he immediately let go of me, closed the trunk, and drove away just as my parents started to run to me. I was crying my eyes out, terrified out of my mind knowing that a taxi driver tried to put me in his trunk, and drove away the second that I screamed for help. It's scary to think what could have happened to me had he been stronger and more prepared, or faster. He is the reason that I am still terrified of taxis, Ubers, Lyfts, and any car service of that nature. This happened quite a while ago. My lifestyle at the time was very high risk. This story means a lot to me as it restored my much-needed faith in humanity. To explain why this incident meant so much to me, I need to provide a bit of backstory. I live in a really sketchy part of town. The particular building I lived in was a refurbished loft type with a very ugly history. You could still see the damage in the concrete walls from all the gunfire that it had taken at one point. Talking the pizza guy into delivering was always fun. No sir, it's not still a crime scene. Yes, real people live here. There was a local gas station within walking distance. Your typical shady place populated by shady people doing shady things. I had and still have a tendency to be somewhat chatty and polite when spoken to by strangers, especially if I frequent that store and see them often. I wound up making friends with a man named Houston, who had a talent for obtaining recreational plant life. We would hang out and philosophize about life and the like. I just felt like he had a good soul. I was coming home from a bar that I frequented one night. It was a Friday and that area was a popular night spot, so at closing time cabs would line up. I was quite drunk but sober enough to know better than to drive. The cab driver was talkative and I was not. I just wanted to go home and watch the world spin. Almost immediately out of his mouth came some of the most lecherous and disgusting things I'd ever heard. He would arc his neck around while driving, lick his lips and say just horrible things. And the worst part was not only did he have me in a moving vehicle, but he knew where I lived. I had no phone and just enough money for the ride home, and I was terrified. "You want me to pull in so I can lick you?" "No thank you, I'd like to go home and vomit." Being the smartass that I was, I said that. It was as if I hadn't said anything at all to the man though. He kept turning around and reaching out to grab me as I swerved out of his reach. "Hey, show me him, I want to see him." The situation escalated when he started to drive around aimlessly, pulling into dark complexes and slowing down to try and grab me. I had to do something, so I did something that I don't think he was expecting. I flirted with him. I leaned over the front seat and gave him my best drunk and seductive face and said, "Do you want to party?" He stopped, looking blank for a moment before a huge grin widening across his face. "Oh yeah, where do you want to party? You want to party here?" He started to adjust himself and I wanted to rip that frickin' thing off. "No, not here, let's get some beer and go to my place." He agreed and I led him to my local gas station. "Pull in here and I'll go get some. What do you like?" I said sweetly. He said he didn't care and as soon as he parked I grabbed my bag and got out. He sat there waiting. My voice must have had an obvious tone of panic as I asked the lady behind the bulletproof glass, "Is Houston here?" She looked concerned and shouted for him. He came out from the back. I was so relieved and in one hysterical breath, I told him everything. The expression on his face darkened, and he said to me very curtly, "You stay here." I walked to the window as he exited the store. He took 3 steps outside, whistled, and with arms out on either side, he made a "come here" motion. Out of the darkness came 20 really scary guys from both sides. He pointed to the cab and said something that I didn't quite make out. Whatever it was, they swarmed the cab and they tried to flip it over. That cab burned rubber peeling out of the parking lot. The men then looked back at the store window and Houston laughed, nodded, and they disappeared back into the darkness. It was surreal. My jaw was on the floor and Houston came back inside with a grin. I don't think he'll be back. I couldn't thank him enough. He was my hero at that point, hands down. It had started to rain, so he and his friend walked me home under a giant umbrella. There are no words to describe the restoration of my faith in humanity that night. Cliché as it sounds, there really is light in the darkest of places, and kindness in the most unexpected of places.